Welcome to another episode of Taking Down Trump. I'm your host, Tristan Snell. We've got a wonderful guest segment coming up later today with Representative Khanna joining the show, talking to us about what's going on Capitol Hill right now. But first, we're going to get into some of the craziest stories from law and politics this week. The story that's been going around lately has been really still the issue around J.D. Vance and the town of Springfield, Ohio, where Vance admitted that he had fabricated, confabulated something. His term was creating, okay? He talks about creating stories, that he had seen a Facebook post and then was creating stories to capture media attention. Come on, there's no doubt about it what he's talking about when he's talking about creating stories. We know exactly what he meant. He got caught and then was trying to wiggle his way out of it by basically saying that by admitting that he had created these stories, that he had done it to shine a light on what he thinks is this horrible immigration problem, as opposed to it's the same thing that's been happening in America since America was founded. We have times where there's a lot of immigration all at once. There are peaks and valleys, and it comes to certain places more than others, and there's adjustments. And inevitably, as there has been throughout America's history, sadly, there has been a reactionary element that has been xenophobic and has said, go home, regardless of who that was. Who was it back in the early days of America? It was Germans that were told to go home, that there were too many of them all in one place. They're speaking the language of their home country. They're eating the food of their home country. They have these weird habits and customs. They need to get out of here. This isn't America. They were talking about that about Germans. If you go read history books about this, it's happened over and over and over again. First, it was Germans. Then it was the Irish. Then later it was Italian, Eastern European, a lot of Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe and Central Europe. It's come in waves. And now you go more and more into the present day, where you've had more and more immigrants from Latin America, from the Caribbean, from Asia, from Africa, from all over the world. But it's the same story with J.D. Vance. It's the same crap that he's trying to peddle with these people eating cats and dogs. He fabricated this story, got caught, kind of tried to wiggle his way out of it, but didn't, because we all know what creating the story means, okay? And in the meantime, what has he done to a city in his own state? He is a senator from the state of Ohio. What has he done to the people of Springfield? There have been over a dozen, and I think it's coming up on 20 different bomb threats and threats of violence against different institutions, especially schools in Springfield in the last week and a half since all of this happened, in the last 2 weeks. This is absolutely horrible. These people are now living in fear and mayhem and chaos, and it was caused by J.D. Vance. And this should come as no surprise. This is how America has had to be for 9 years. We're living on tenterhooks. We are walking on eggshells. There's always some sort of other chaos or mayhem or violence or threat of violence that seems to be around the corner in this country. And it goes all the way back to 2015 when Donald Trump came down that goddamn golden escalator. And we've been suffering in this country ever since. When Vice President Harris in the debate the other night said that she wants to end the chaos, I think that should be one of her other main campaign slogans, along with "We're not going back." We need to end the chaos. These things used to be considered beyond the pale in American politics. We need to get back to that point. We need to get out of this new era of McCarthyist fear-mongering and hatred, bashing fellow Americans for where they come from, for the language they speak, the food they eat, where they're from. And definitely, let's be clear about this, a lot of it is because of the color of their skin. Donald Trump has said this himself. Why can't we have more immigrants from the country he named was Norway? Okay, we know what this is all code for. There is a thick thick layer of racism and xenophobia. Actually, they're not layers. They're just fused together. That's what all of this is. We need to see it for what it is. We need to fight it. We need to vote. We need to win so big that people like J.D. Vance will actually go back to what they would have been before and be ashamed to open their mouths, as opposed to letting this all be out in the open again. We can't have this anymore in this country. So it's got to stop. And we are the ones that are going to have to do it. We're going to have to go and vote in such large numbers that we shut up someone like J.D. Vance, so he can't go around creating stories anymore that cause real harm to real communities of legal immigrants. And that brings us to one of the next things that I want to talk about, which is the fact that Donald Trump is now saying, Trump and Vance are now saying that they want to have this community of Haitian immigrants and other communities like them around the country and send them back to Haiti. He wants to deport all of these people. Never mind that these people are not, the ones in Springfield, are not undocumented. They are legal immigrants. They are going through a legal process. They are not undocumented. They are actually in the system. And you're going to send them home. That's what he wants to do. Let's be really clear what the overall theme here is, and we'll tie it back to Project 2025. As you know, we've been doing the series Decoding Project 2025, which I strongly urge all of you to listen to, where I've been going through the entire document page by page and helping us understand what's in it. We already talked about this in the earlier episode regarding the Department of Homeland Security and regarding immigration, but I think that it's very, very important to emphasize one of the things that's going on here. There's a really chilling word in that document in Project 2025. Denaturalization. This is extremely dangerous territory that the right-wing Donald Trump, J.D. Vance want to go down. Denaturalization. Let's understand what the hell that means. They want to take people that are naturalized American citizens. So these are people that went through the legal immigration process. They got their visa. They got their green card. You then have to go 5 years after getting a green card, or 3 if you're married to an American citizen, and then you're eligible to become a naturalized American citizen, which millions of people elect to do all the time because they love America. They've made a home here and they want to stay. And this is a way of them affirming and formalizing their commitment to this country. This is something we should be tearing up about with happiness. Something really wonderful that happens all the time that I wish more people would see, because I think maybe it would give people a different perspective on what immigration is and what it means for America and what the devotion that a lot of these folks have for this country, for their adopted home. If you ever have the chance to go to, it's usually at a federal building or a courthouse. Obviously, there's more people going through these ceremonies in a big city, but it can happen all across the country. Look at Springfield, Ohio. Every month, roughly, there are naturalization ceremonies that occur with these folks who have decided to make America their home permanently. They have a green card already by definition. They went through the legal process by definition, but they've now decided to take that last step to be naturalized citizens because they're going to stay for good. They know that, and they want to affirm and formalize their commitment to this country and what it stands for. This is home now. And these folks love this country. They've passed a citizenship test as part of this too, where they had to go through a quiz, a test of all these things about American history and government. What are the branches of government? Talk about checks and balances, separation of powers. Go through a bunch of things regarding, say, the American Revolution. I think a lot of native-born and nativist Americans would probably have a hard time passing this test. I think a lot of these xenophobes who rattle on about 1776 probably wouldn't be able to tell you much about what really happened in that year or during that era. I don't think that they would. I think a lot of them would fail this test, but let's just put that aside for a second. It's a beautiful thing watching these ceremonies. People are crying. They have their families there, tears of joy. They've got their little American flags. Everybody dresses up. It's a beautiful thing to see this. I've gotten to see it a number of times, and it's a really special thing when people are making that commitment and taking the oath to be loyal to this country. And they mean it. And it's a beautiful thing. And so what you're asking for when you're saying denaturalization is you're going to take a bunch of those folks who've done everything that was asked of them. They did everything the right way. They followed all the rules. And these are the folks that, you see these points from the right wing. We want people who really want to be here. We want people who are going to assimilate. And so a lot of that is code for a lot of racism. These are folks who literally did all of those things. They came in legally. They did it the right way. They decided they're going to stay here. They have to actually pass this citizenship test. They have to have some command of English. All of these things are true in order for them to get the citizenship. And you're going to take that away from them. That's what Project 2025 and Trump and Vance want to do. Virtually all of us are immigrants in one way or another. If you go back far enough, almost everybody, except Native Americans, are. And guess what? Everybody went through this process if you go back far enough in your ancestry. And you're going to then say, you know what? We're going to overturn almost 250 years of American law. And we're going to say, even once you've gotten the citizenship, we can take it away from you and send you back home to where you came from. That is an absolutely terrifying thought. That is basically ethnic cleansing by deportation is really what they're going for when they say denaturalization. Okay. And then it would hold true for everything else across the line. You've got your green card. Sorry, we're taking it away and we're deporting you. You've got a visa. Sorry, we're taking it away and we're deporting you. Why? Not because they committed a crime, not because they did anything wrong, but because you now have basically a white power movement in power that has decided to take these people and kick them out of the country that they have adopted and love, built a home in, built businesses in. Immigrants build businesses at a way higher rate than native-born Americans. Immigrants commit less crime than native-born Americans. But never mind all of that. And never mind that literally this country was built by immigrants. No, we're going to send them home because we don't like the color of their skin, the language that they speak, the food that they eat, the place that they came from. But when we're talking about Donald Trump saying, hey, these Haitian immigrants in Springfield don't care if they're legal, we're going to kick them out. Let's understand exactly what this is all part and parcel of, because this is, again, the most radical program by a major party in this country since the Civil War. That is what this is. And it's not just going to be the 11 to 25 or so million undocumented immigrants in this country that Trump is going to kick out. It looks like he would be gearing up to deport millions and millions more of legal immigrants too. And what that would do to this country, it would be a human rights disaster of epic proportions. It would be the biggest forced movement of people in the modern era of history in the world. And that's what they're proposing. It's nothing short of that. That's what's on the ballot in November. One of the other big stories this week, ProPublica came out with a pair of absolutely heart-wrenching articles about the first two confirmed preventable deaths from an abortion ban in this country in the era after Roe v. Wade. First off, we may want to ask ourselves, why is this only happening now? Roe's been gone for a couple of years now. The answer is because the reporting around these things by medical boards, by hospital boards, tends to lag. There's a sort of bureaucratic process that must be undertaken to review what's considered to be, or what could be considered, a preventable death. And sometimes it takes time for these things to be investigated, for a committee to release a report, et cetera, et cetera. In the case of the state of Georgia, where these two deaths occurred, it was a medical board at the state level comprised of over 30 medical professionals, and it took time for this process to play out. That's typical. This is not just this particular situation. This is how this would be for anything, even if it didn't have to do with abortion or reproductive rights. So we're only at the very beginning of the process of learning what has happened in the wake of Roe. the tragedies and just human suffering that are going to be told about in the weeks and months and years to come. There are probably going to be a heap of other deaths that we're going to find out about just in Georgia alone, let alone in all of the other states that passed these often draconian abortion bans. In Georgia, it's a 6-week ban, which is almost impossible for anybody to get around because a lot of women don't even know that they're pregnant until they're more than 6 weeks pregnant, because the date at which that begins, how that's clocked, is about the last menstrual cycle. So a lot of women don't even know that they're pregnant until they're, technically speaking, much further along when you count the weeks of a pregnancy. One of these women, Amber Nicole Thurman, was in the hospital and was dying in a hospital bed and then in the ICU because the hospital couldn't figure out what to do. They didn't want to act because they were worried about getting prosecuted. And by the time they did act, and they did actually do a D&C procedure on her, it was too late. She was dying of sepsis and organ failure, and she died in the operating room. She left behind a 6-year-old son. How the hell is this pro-life? I don't understand. You've left this little boy without his mother. She was a person who was doing good in the world herself. She was a medical assistant and was planning to go to nursing school, which is part of why she had determined, as was her human right, that she did not want to have another baby at that time. And that is why she sought to end the pregnancy. She went to North Carolina to get medication. She had complications, which are rare but do happen. However, this is something that is considered to be a routine procedure to complete the termination of the pregnancy with a D&C procedure. It is considered to be routine and normal and not a big deal, unless it isn't done, and then bad things happen. In this case, the woman going septic, having mass infection, dying of organ failure. We know that a lot of these right-wing legislators in states like Georgia put in these life of the mother exceptions that they like to crow about. You see these old white legislators talking about, I put this provision in for the life of the mother. They might sound good to these people as they sit around with their cigars and brandy talking about the legislation that they're going to pass to regulate the lives of women that they have nothing to do with and that they shouldn't be regulating. But it doesn't matter, and it doesn't work in a hospital. Like in the pressure cooker situation of a hospital, you're effectively asking the doctors and nurses to say, okay, we need to let this person get so sick that their life is in danger, but not sick enough that we can't save them. So you're asking for this like Goldilocks moment where it's just like, well, you look like you're about to die, but I think we can still save you. Okay, we'll do the procedure because the law now lets us. That's what a life of the mother exception ends up meaning on the ground in a hospital with someone who's dying. It doesn't work. And these folks were terrified of getting prosecuted. This criminal prosecution that these doctors and nurses and other medical assistants were going to face. And so what did they do? We don't know the full story yet, but there was probably a lot of frantic talking to the lawyers for the hospital and other folks involved with making these kind of decisions. And they were probably just going back and forth about what the heck to do. And they were ultimately was determined to just wait and see. Maybe she would improve. Maybe she would worsen, and then they could take action. They didn't time it just right, evidently, and she died. It was too late to save her. How many women have died because of the reversal of Roe v. Wade? We don't know yet. So far, the count is at 2. I think the count's going to go a lot higher. I think we're going to hear a lot more of these stories, and I think we need to listen to them. This is exactly what everybody said would happen if you got rid of Roe v. Wade. It's exactly the kind of thing that did happen before Roe v. Wade. And the people that were saying these things on the reproductive rights side were written off as being hysterical and hyperbolic. We were exaggerating. Parade of horribles. It's not going to be that bad. You're just fear-mongering. They still say that to this day when any of this stuff comes up. ProPublica went to the governor's office in Georgia and asked for a comment and got back a blast about how ProPublica was fear-mongering. How the hell is it fear-mongering to actually just write a straight-up story about how a woman died? That's not fear-mongering. That's journalism. If you think that's fear-mongering, just wait, because there's going to be a lot more of these stories coming out, and they need to be paired with political action by all of us. We need to get ready. We need to be listening to this stuff, even though it's difficult to read, even though it's difficult to hear about. And we need to actually be ready to take action, because the horrible things that we thought were going to happen are happening. And we've got to do something about it in this country. We have one more story to cover this week about healthcare and pre-existing conditions, J.D. Vance and Donald Trump, and we'll be talking about all of that next. For one more longer discussion today, I want to talk about something else that happened in the healthcare space. We now have gone about a week since the last presidential debate between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, where Donald Trump infamously talked about his concepts of a plan regarding healthcare, regarding specifically the replacement, his wanting to replace the Affordable Care Act, the ACA, otherwise known as Obamacare. And he was trying to claim that he had saved Obamacare and that he was eventually still, after all these years, he campaigned that he was going to have a replacement plan back in 2016. He never came up with one during 4 years in the White House. He is now still claiming 8 years later that he is going to have a plan someday. Let's just talk about that for a minute. And we'll also talk about how this ties into Project 2025 and then some things that J.D. Vance managed to pour out of his mouth hole on Meet the Press the other day. Vance is always great at then trying to clean up what Trump says and then making it worse. So we'll get to that. So let's just talk about this for a second. Let's correct the record first. Donald Trump tried to kill the ACA 60 times while he was president, along with his allies, Republicans in Congress. 60 times that he tried to do that. He didn't try to save it. He tried to kill it over and over and over again. So that's number one. Number two, there obviously is no plan. The concepts of a plan thing was him trying to tap dance around that issue and looking like a fool while he did it. Okay. But then we actually get to J.D. Vance and to Project 2025. The two of those together, and mind you, they're very much connected along with Trump, because Vance was supposed to write the foreword, I think already did. And they're not putting out the book of Project 2025 like they were going to. But J.D. Vance was writing or already wrote the foreword for it. Okay. This isn't something that's like, oh, again, Project 2025 is not some sort of different thing that has nothing to do with the Trump-Vance campaign. It is the policy arm of the Trump-Vance campaign. Okay, let's look at Project 2025 and what J.D. Vance said on Meet the Press, because I think it's really important, even if it gets into the policy weeds just a little bit. Project 2025 talks about circumventing the requirement that insurance companies not discriminate on the basis of pre-existing conditions. What does that mean? As you may know, what happened with the ACA, one of the bedrock reforms that it enacted was to make it so that if you had a pre-existing condition, like say diabetes or lupus, something like that, chronic condition, that you could not be charged at a higher rate just because of that condition. Because what happened prior to the ACA is that insurance companies just wouldn't cover people with pre-existing conditions like that. They just wouldn't. If you didn't have employer insurance or you didn't have Medicare or Medicaid, you didn't have coverage. And that's why we had, in those years prior to the ACA, tens of millions of uninsured Americans and all of the problems that entailed. All of the terrible healthcare outcomes, all of the extra costs, all of the extra emergency room visits, all of the everything. The ACA fixed that problem, among others. And it was a great and wonderful thing for millions and millions of Americans. The Republicans want to undo that. They have been wanting to undo that ever since it was passed. They're still trying to undo that to this day. It's in Project 2025. But oh, wait, J.D. Vance then spilled the beans a little bit more. He's trying to clean up Donald Trump's mess, but he actually made it worse because he goes on Meet the Press the other day and he admits, he starts talking some policy gibberish that Kristen Welker actually doesn't seem to have quite picked up on. I don't think she was speaking healthcare policy ease, but unfortunately, I know a little bit of it. He was talking about like making sure you can get different policies for different stages of life and different stages of health. He was talking about risk pools and saying this was how they were going, these were the things that were going to be a better plan for them. If you read it, it's plain as day that what he was talking about was letting insurance companies charge more, potentially cripplingly amounts more for pre-existing conditions or denying coverage altogether. One group of people for whom this is true, and this, it shows everything ties together, is immigrant seniors who have legally come to this country, say they're getting a green card because they got sponsored by their grown child who is a newly minted American citizen. This is a large group of people. In fact, I'll give you one example of folks that it might include is potentially, say, Melania Trump's parents. Melania Trump, American citizen. We know that she sponsored having her parents move from Slovenia and immigrate to America. They are elderly. They were not eligible for Medicare in all likelihood. They're going to have to be resident in America as green card holders for 5 years before they get to go on Medicare. In the meantime, I don't know, maybe somehow the Trump people have made her parents employees or something shady. But I would be willing to bet you that Melania Trump's parents are on the ACA exchange. They're on an ACA exchange. I bet you that's true. Don't know for sure, but I bet you that's true. There are a large number of people in this country that are seniors who fall into that bucket, and they need to be able to buy coverage on those exchanges. The insurance companies are allowed to charge them more. Old people have poorer health on average, of course, than somebody who's 25, right? They are allowed to charge up to 3 times as much as they would charge a young, healthy person. But they can't deny coverage. They have to offer plans to those folks. And they can't have it be 10 times more or 20 times more. So the policies are a lot more expensive than they would be for someone who's younger, but there is an option. It's there. It's not perfect. It's probably still overpriced, but it's there. And that's actually a good way to describe a lot of what's happened with the ACA overall. Vast improvement on everything that came before it. It's not perfect. A lot of things are still more costly than they ought to be, but it's a big improvement. And you shouldn't go backwards to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You need to go forwards and keep on trying to find better ways to improve it. Going back to the old days when you could actually have discrimination on the basis of pre-existing conditions or having a denial of coverage or even more jacked up rates for elderly folks that want to buy individual plans, that's a giant step backwards. And now the cat is out of the bag and we need to be sounding the alarm. Okay, this is in Project 2025. J.D. Vance let it spill out of his mouth the other day. This is still what the Trump plan is ultimately. When they talk about reforming the ACA, they want to kill it. They don't want to reform it. They want to go back to the pre-ACA days because it was more lucrative for insurance companies and pharma companies and hospitals and other big players in the healthcare industry. They liked it better. And Trump has been the avatar for them to try to turn back the clock and make it back to what it used to be. And J.D. Vance is right there with him. And Project 2025 outlines a lot of how they want to go do it. Again, if you have a pre-existing condition or you have a loved one who does, if you have any elderly folks in your family who are not on Medicare for whatever reason, and maybe they're buying their coverage on an ACA exchange, they are in danger. They are in really big danger. These people's lives and health are at risk, and we need to step up and vote and make sure that we're doing something to defend them. Our interview with Representative Ro Khanna is next, right after this. We have a very special guest for this week. Representative Ro Khanna serves as a member of the House from California's 17th District that encompasses a lot of the South Bay and Silicon Valley area of the Bay Area. Khanna's been in Congress since 2017. He's a noted progressive and has been active as an author and co-sponsor on a lot of groundbreaking and forward-looking legislation. Really happy to have him here on the show.
I'm pleased to be on. I was admiring the two flags in your setting. I love it.
Thank you so much, sir. We're going to begin with something that's been in the news a good bit lately, and I know is a topic, a policy area that you cover quite a lot, and that is tariffs and trade. If you could tell us a bit about what you really think America ought to be doing from a policy perspective in this space, particularly vis-a-vis China.
Well, there's no doubt that we need strategic tariffs on industries that we want in the United States. But the operative word there is strategic. The problem I have with Donald Trump's proposals is that he wants to tariff everything, including our allies, and he wants to do it on every product, not just on things we make in the United States. The other problem is that you have to combine tariffs with financing for the new factories, with workforce development, with a policy that allows the industry and plants to be here. And that's what Joe Biden has done. I actually think that's why we have so many new factories coming up in places like Michigan, Pennsylvania. So Trump's taken one part of the Hamilton agenda, blown it up in a way that's not strategic, whereas you need a comprehensive approach. Tariffs has to be one part of it.
And what else do you think we can be doing coming up to encourage more of this manufacturing, especially in areas like, say, chips? Obviously, this is a very important area for any modern economy, and it's something that, of course, is strategically important for America. What else do you think we can be doing there?
Well, let's look at three examples briefly. I co-wrote the Chips and Science Act. President signed it. It's helping bring semiconductor manufacturing back. But one of the problems we've seen is that we haven't done enough on the demand side. So Apple and other companies that are buying these chips, it's not enough to say, okay, they're buy from America. They're not doing it. And so we probably need some tax credits or incentive for people to buy American chips in addition to the supply side. Another area is my modern steel bill. I mean, why aren't we America leading in the steel industry of the future that's 1/6 the carbon footprint with hydrogen or direct reduction iron? We should be financing that, putting up 3-4 new steel plants in deindustrialized areas. And the final thing is I'd look at the automobile industry. I mean, it's crazy to me that Stellantis wants to take the Wagoneer and Jeep production lines and send them to Canada or Mexico. We can't afford to lose our existing capacity if we want to lead in manufacturing and self-driving cars in the future. We can't get rid of our manufacturing base. So we need smart tariff tax policy to allow plants and existing capacity to stay here.
Very interesting. Yeah, the demand side thing, I think, is something that maybe people aren't as much aware of. That's a really good point. That it's one thing to be producing them here, but then we've got to make sure that everybody actually does, in fact, buy them. And if we have to do that with some incentives, then that's what you have to do, right? The whole economy is full of incentives one way or another, right? So I think that's very interesting. Let's turn to another thing that's been in the news a lot this week. We got the reports from ProPublica about the first confirmed preventable deaths of women as a result of a state abortion ban post Roe v. Wade. These two happened in Georgia. It is believed that there may be many more reports like this to come. I know this is an area that you've covered quite a lot. What would you have to say about where do we need to go to stop this kind of thing from happening, where we have these folks that are being denied critical care because doctors can't figure out how to not get prosecuted under a state abortion ban?
Well, it's shocking. It's heartbreaking. It's candidly why we need Vice President Harris as president. We need to have a federal law that codifies Roe versus Wade. And this idea that let the states decide, that's assuming that you don't believe women's rights are fundamental human
Right.
rights. I mean, what did we think of Douglas's formulation? Stephen Douglas, let the states decide
Right.
on issues of slavery. I mean, I fundamentally believe women's rights, a woman's right to control her own body is a human right. And that's why we need a national codification of Roe versus Wade, or we're going to continue to see this.
Yeah, I think there was one point where I wrote that let the states decide was in fact part of the pro-slavery argument in the 1850s. That's exactly right. There's a really crazy parallel there where it's like, look, if you don't believe that that's a fundamental national right, then go ahead, let states violate it all over the place. But if you actually understand that, no, that's a fundamental human right, then why do you let some states violate human rights and other states don't? How is that okay? Right? How is that constitutional?
Yeah, you put it more eloquently than I did, but that's exactly that's exactly right.
I don't know about that, but yeah, yeah, it's yeah. So let's also turn to some things in terms of economic policy that I know are near and dear to your heart, and that you've done some really great work co-sponsoring legislation on, particularly with regard to the College for All Act. I think that's something that a lot of people probably don't know about because given the current state of Capitol Hill, it's not advancing like we would hope it should. But I think it's important for people to know what legislation is on the horizon, potentially, what that could look like and what it could mean for them.
Well, Tristan, let me make the economic argument for why we need free public college or vocational education in this country. Between 1910 and 1940, America made a decision that we were going to have free high school for everyone. Europe did not make that decision. Europe said, you want to go to high school, you got to be one of the wealthier elites. As a result, by the 1950s and 1960s, 80% of Americans had gone to high school. This is contrasting with 20 to 30% in Europe. And this gave us an enormous advantage. This is one of the reasons we emerged as the world's economic power. Well, in today's age, you need more than high school education, whether that is a credential for the vocational trades, whether it is a credential for a job in technology, or whether it's a four-year degree. And it is malpractice that we aren't making that investment for $50 billion or so a year, which is about 5% of our defense budget. We could be investing in the potential of the next generation of Americans. And I just hope eventually we're going to get there. I just hope it's not too late.
So how would that work in your view if we were to do that? If you could explain how some of these policies would work if we can enact them, I think that'd be helpful for folks to know.
Sure. Well, you would have a federal grant that goes to the states that then they could give to the public colleges or qualifying vocational institutes, with the provision that the states put up some of the funding so that the states also have some of the responsibility, and with the provision that the public institution isn't raising tuition beyond 1 or 2% every year. So you don't have a situation where you're creating a lot of demand and then the colleges just keep raising their prices. You know, we have this in California. You could have gone to California, Berkeley for free, basically, in the 1950s and 1960s. Yes. And they used to throw in the football tickets. And, you know, the prices just exploded. And that is not normal. There's no other country, Western democracy, which makes people go thousands of dollars in debt just to get an education.
I think it's important also that then people understand that would also work for, say, what are these programs? The vocational technical programs are often 2 years, that it would also work for those, that's part of the blend of things. We're not saying everybody's got to go get a 4-year college degree. Different folks are going to follow different paths. A lot of those vocational technical paths actually lead to better paying and more stable jobs than some of the 4-year college degree programs out there. I think it's very important that that's part of the mix. And I find it very encouraging that that's part of the policy proposal here.
It absolutely is. And I think this has been a part of the challenge, candidly, with some of the messaging around it, that we tend to emphasize the free public college part and not enough about, well, this allows you to go to vocational education. And by the way, if you don't need it for vocational education, you can use some stipend to buy the equipment that you may need to do the job in trades. Or for some people, a 12, 18-month credential in technology that allows you to be a developer, which you don't need a lot of math anymore. It's something that young people are doing. People who are good at video games are doing things in terms of the transferability of those skills. So there are a lot of things we can do without a 4-year degree, but the point is high school isn't enough. And I think that's a consensus in this country.
One last area I'd like to get into a bit has to do with workers and unionization. I know that you've been a very strong backer of the new wave of unionization regarding companies like Starbucks. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, I just think in a country where we're producing more wealth than ever before, in a district like mine, Silicon Valley, I've got $10 to $12 trillion of market value in my district. We're producing NVIDIA, Apple, Google, Tesla. We're producing more wealth in human history in my zip code than it's ever done. And we're going to continue to do it in AI. And you're telling me in that kind of a country and economy, we can't make sure that everyone has a living wage, that the baristas who serve coffee to the tech engineers, that they can't make a decent wage and have decent hours and have healthcare? I think that business leaders should be the most vocal proponents for saying that working class Americans should have dignity, they should have a living wage, they should have health care, they should have the ability to form a union if that's what they want, because otherwise we're going to be torn apart as a country as wealth keeps piling up in some places and the working and middle class keeps falling behind.
And it's in the interest of the business community, because if you don't actually have a strong middle class, you're going to run out of consumers. Right? Who's going to go buy a $5 cup of coffee if people are making $8 an hour? It doesn't add up. You look at the earlier ages of industrialization. Henry Ford actually thought that it was in his own self-interest to pay his workers more so that they could actually go and afford the cars that they were making. Right?
You're absolutely right.
I feel like we're missing that. We're missing that today.
Yeah, and instead you're just going to have the wealth continue to pile up with tech billionaires who may buy yachts and planes and fancy houses and put their money in stock markets, but it's not going to drive the consumer spending that is the hallmark of America's economic growth. And I think I appreciate, Tristan, your points here, because I think the Democrats need to be more aggressive on making the economic arguments for our policies. People think we care more, we may care more about fairness, but it also happens to be a lot of the things we're talking about is what built America's economic growth and economic dynamism.
That's right. A lot of these things, yes, we can talk about altruism, and we do, and I think we do care more, and I think we care more about taking care of people rather than taking advantage of people, which is a theme I return to a lot. But I also think that a lot of these things are in the self-interest of the folks at the top and the folks that are running a lot of these enterprises. And I think some of them know it, and I think some of them maybe need to be reminded occasionally.
Absolutely, and I think Henry Ford is a great example, and it's two reasons. One is it builds our economy. It's the other reason is you can't have a democracy where what's happened in our country happens, which is that the top 0.1% today make twice the income that they did since the 70s and pay half the tax rate. And you're asking for resentment. And that's certainly, we have a lot of resentment in our politics.
Sadly so. All right. Well, thank you so much. This is Representative Ro Khanna. Really fantastic interview. Happy to have you here, sir. And keep up the great work on Capitol Hill. We need you in there doing all this terrific work and hopefully getting some better legislation passed.
Well, Tristan, I appreciate your podcast and honor to be on one.
Thank you. That's our show for this week. As always, make sure you follow this podcast so you get all of the episodes automatically downloaded to all of your devices, including our special series, Decoding Project 2025, where I read the entire 880-page document that I like to refer to as a boredom fascism sandwich. And I'm going to tell you all about the things that you need to know without actually having to read the 880-page document. Also, make sure to follow me on Twitter and subscribe to my Substack, which is free. We're also doing Decoding Project 2025 over there. So make sure you check that out, and we'll see you next time.